The sun over Redrock Flats didn't shine in the summer of 1882. It punished. It pressed down on the cracked earth like a boot heel on dry kindling, bleaching the wooden storefronts pale as old bone, baking the dust into something that tasted like copper when the wind pushed it between your teeth. By 10 in the morning, the street was usually alive with the sounds of a working town, wagon wheels grinding against packed dirt, merchants calling out from open doorways, children chasing one another past the barber shop and the dry goods store. Horses stamped and snorted at their posts. Women in calico dresses moved briskly along the boardwalks, shading themselves beneath wide-brimmed bonnets. But on this particular Tuesday morning, Redrock Flats was absolutely, completely, unnervingly silent. Every shop door was closed. Every window shutter was angled just enough to allow a sliver of vision from inside, not enough to be noticed, but enough to see. The merchant couple who ran the dry goods store stood motionless behind their counter, not speaking, barely breathing. The barber had set down his straight razor mid-shave, and his customer sat frozen in the chair, half his face still covered in white lather, eyes wide. Even the stray dog that usually slept across the entrance of the post office had disappeared somewhere beneath the building, silent and low. They had all heard the sound before they saw him. A slow, heavy rhythm, iron shoes on dry earth, deliberate and unhurried, like a clock that had all the time in the world. One beat, then another, growing louder, coming from the north end of town. Then he appeared at the crest of the main road. The horse came first, and what a horse it was. A massive black warhorse, standing nearly 17 hands high, with a chest like a barrel and legs like carved timber. Its coat was so dark it seemed to pull the light inward rather than reflect it, gleaming like polished coal beneath the merciless sun. It moved with absolute authority, each step placed with the quiet confidence of an animal that had never once been frightened by anything the world had offered it. The townspeople who knew horses, and in Redrock Flats, that was nearly everyone, recognized immediately that this was not a ranch animal. This was not a trail horse or a plow animal. This was something built for a different kind of purpose entirely. The man on its back matched it in every way. Colraven sat in the saddle the way mountains sit on the earth, like he had simply always been there and fully intended to remain. He was lean without being slight, with wide shoulders that carried 3 years of hard travel and harder living. His dark coat was road-dusted but whole, his hat pulled low against the sun, its brim straight and undecorated. His face, what could be seen beneath that brim, was weathered and calm, the kind of calm that doesn't come from peace, but from a man who has already decided exactly what he is going to do and has made his full agreement with it. A jaw set like a door that has been locked from the inside. Eyes the color of storm clouds, not violent, not cold, simply certain. Around his waist sat a gun belt, worn and well kept, 2 revolvers holstered with the ease of long familiarity. He did not touch them. His hands rested loosely on the saddle horn, and he guided Midnight, for that was the horse's name, given by the only person in Redrock Flats who had ever truly known Colraven, with nothing more than the quiet pressure of his knees. He rode at a walk, the whole long length of Main Street, every window filled with a watching eye, every doorway empty, every boardwalk deserted. He rode through it like a man passing through a church, not out of reverence but out of recognition. He had been here before. He knew this street. He had walked it as a young deputy, proud and sure of himself. He had walked it on the arm of a woman whose laugh had sounded like something worth protecting. He had last walked it in iron shackles, head high, refusing to look at the ground, while a crowd that called itself decent had watched and done nothing. 3 years was a long time, but a man with a true purpose doesn't count days. He counts the distance between where he is and where he needs to be. Cole brought Midnight to a slow stop at the water trough beside the hitching post near the center of town. He sat still a moment, then swung down from the saddle in a single fluid motion, boots meeting the earth with a quiet finality. He let the reins go loose, and Midnight dropped his great head to drink without any further instruction. Cole stood beside the horse, one hand resting briefly on its neck, not nervously, just in acknowledgement, and looked down the street toward the far end of town, toward the Silver Spur Saloon. A door creaked to his left. Young Deputy Harris stepped cautiously out from the sheriff's office, one hand near his hip, the other raised slightly, unsure what gesture this moment called for. Cole looked at him. Then slowly he reached down, unbuckled his gun belt, folded it once and held it out. Harris blinked. He stepped forward and took it with both hands like something fragile. Cole nodded once, not warmly, not coldly, and turned toward the saloon. He walked to the doors. He pushed them open. He stepped inside, and in the hush that followed, he let his eyes move across every face in that dim and smoky room, the gamblers, the drinkers, the hired hands, the frightened and the guilty alike. And then he spoke, loudly, clearly, without hesitation. "It means I do." Nobody understood, not yet. The Silver Spur Saloon held its breath. Glasses sat untouched on tables. Cards lay where they had been dropped. The piano in the corner, which had been producing a lazy, rolling tune moments before Cole Raven walked through the doors, had stopped mid-note. The player's hands simply lifted from the keys, as though the music itself had decided this was not its moment. Somewhere near the back, a chair scraped against the floorboards as a man slowly rose to his feet, then thought better of whatever he had intended and sat back down. Cole stood at the center of it, all unhurried, his coat still carrying the dust of the road. His eyes moving across the room with the steady patience of a man who had rehearsed this moment 10,000 times in the dark, and was in absolutely no rush now that it had finally arrived. Then, from the top of the staircase that curved down from the saloon's upper floor, came a voice like gravel rolled in oil. "Well." Vic Harlow descended the stairs one slow step at a time, one broad hand trailing along the banister, a glass of whiskey in the other. He was a large man gone slightly soft at the edges, thick through the chest, wide in the jaw, with small eyes that had learned long ago how to look amused when they were actually calculating. He wore a fine vest over a white shirt, a silver watch chain looping across his middle, the whole presentation of a man who had convinced himself that wealth and respectability were the same thing. "Cole Raven, I heard a rumor you were dead." "You heard wrong," Cole said. Harlow reached the bottom of the stairs and spread his arms slightly, gesturing at the room with the easy confidence of a man on his own stage. "And what does it mean?" he asked, his voice carrying a thin curl of mockery. "Your little announcement." Cole didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes moved to a corner table near the far window, to old Walt Briggs, the bartender who had worked the Silver Spur for 11 years and hated every one of them. Walt was staring into his cloth, wiping the same spot on the bar he had been wiping for the past 2 minutes. His jaw was tight. His eyes were careful. Cole looked back at Harlow. "3 years ago," Cole said, his voice steady and unhurried, filling the room without effort, "you wanted the Sutton land. 40 acres on the South Creek, sitting right where the railroad men told you they needed to lay track. Me's father wouldn't sell, so you found another way." A small shift moved through the room, a collective lean, barely perceptible, of people who had suspected something for a long time, and were now hearing it spoken aloud in plain language. "You forged a land transfer document," Cole continued. "Bribed Judge Calloway with $500, paid in 2 installments, the second of which Walt Briggs here carried personally to the judge's back door on a Thursday evening in April." He paused. "Walt told me so himself. Signed a testimony before a federal notary in San Angelo 4 months ago." Walt set down the cloth. He didn't look up, but he didn't deny it either. "Then you needed me gone," Cole said. "So you had Deputy Reeves plant stolen cattle papers in my saddlebag, and Calloway, already in your pocket, made sure the trial lasted exactly 1 day. He took a single step forward. And when they asked me in that courtroom whether she would still stand by me, whether she still intended to marry a man being taken to prison, she looked straight ahead and she said, "I do." In front of everyone, knowing full well what it would cost her. The room was a held breath. They laughed at her, Cole said, quietly now, almost to himself. And they dragged me out, and I made her one promise before the doors closed. I told her those words would mean something before I was finished. He reached inside his coat, every hired hand in the room tensed. Hands moved toward hips, eyes narrowed. Cole produced a leather satchel. He walked to the bar and set it down with a solid, deliberate weight. The sound of it landing cut through the silence like a period at the end of a very long sentence. He unbuckled the flap and laid out the contents one by one. Documents, affidavits, sworn testimonies, a copy of the original forged land deed alongside the genuine one, bank records showing 2 payments from Harlow's account to Calloway's brother in Abilene. Signed and verified, Cole said, by federal Judge Raymond Holt of Austin, witnessed by 3 men from 2 separate counties, none of whom know each other. Harlow's amused expression had not entirely left his face, but it had cracked around the edges, the way ice cracks before it gives way, the surface still holding, the integrity already gone. The back door of the saloon opened. A broad man in a gray duster stepped through, a federal marshal's star catching the light on his chest. He held no weapon. He didn't need to. His presence alone was the whole argument. "Victor Harlow," Marshal Ada said, in the tone of a man completing a task he had been looking forward to, "you are under arrest under federal authority for land fraud, bribery of a territorial judge, and wrongful imprisonment." Harlow's hired hands, 4 of them positioned at various points around the room, looked at one another. Then, one by one, they stepped back, stepped aside, and removed their hands from their weapons. They were paid men, not devoted men. There was a meaningful difference, and every one of them understood it clearly in that moment. Harlow set his whiskey glass down on the banister post beside him. His jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he straightened his vest with both hands, a last, small performance of dignity, and walked toward the marshal without another word. Cole watched him go. Then he turned to face the room, the gamblers, the drinkers, the long silent witnesses of 3 years of quiet wrongdoing. "Mae Sutton said I do in a courtroom when this town looked the other way," he said. "I made her a promise I'd come back and make it mean something. He let that settle. That's what it means. It means I do." For a long moment nothing moved. Then old Walt Briggs reached beneath the bar and brought up 2 glasses and a bottle of the good whiskey. Not the watered-down stock kept for strangers, but the honest bottle kept for moments that deserved honesty. His eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the light. Somewhere near the back of the room, a slow, single clap began. Then another joined it. Then another. And in the corner, the piano player set his hands back on the keys, softly this time, something gentle and unhurried. And the Silver Spur Saloon, for perhaps the first time in 3 long years, sounded like a place where decent people might want to stay a while. The afternoon sun had softened by the time Cole Raven walked back out through the saloon doors. Not cooled. The Texas heat was not in the business of apology, but softened, the way a hard thing sometimes does when the worst of it has already passed. The light had shifted from its midday assault into something longer and more golden, stretching the shadows of the storefronts out across the dirt in warm amber strips. The sky above Redrock Flats, which had seemed so punishing just hours before, had opened itself into a wide, clean blue that went on longer than a man could reasonably follow with his eyes. Cole stepped onto the boardwalk and stopped. She was standing across the street. Mae Sutton had not changed in the way that people sometimes say others haven't changed, meaning they look exactly the same. 3 years had touched her. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before, and something in the way she held herself spoke of a woman who had learned to carry weight without advertising it. Her dark hair was pinned simply, her dress plain and well kept, her hands clasped in front of her with a stillness that Cole recognized immediately as the particular composure of someone who has been quietly extraordinary for a very long time, without anyone thinking to notice. But her eyes were exactly the same, steady, dark, and entirely unafraid. They looked at each other across the street for a long moment, long enough for the afternoon breeze to move between them. Long enough for a man to understand the full distance between 3 years ago and right now, and to feel grateful deeply and wordlessly grateful that the distance had an end. Cole crossed the street. He stopped a few feet from her, hat in hand, and for a moment said nothing. There were no words that could properly open what needed to be said, and they both knew it, so neither of them tried to force any. Me looked at him, at the road-worn lines of his face, at the steadiness in his gray eyes, and gave a single slow nod, the way you nod when something you have been quietly believing for a long time has finally been confirmed. "You kept your word," she said. "I told you I would," Cole said. "You did," she agreed. Then, softly, "I never stopped believing it. It was not a dramatic reunion. There were no grand declarations delivered to an audience, no sweeping gestures performed for effect. Cole simply reached out and took her hand in his, and me let him, and they stood like that in the middle of Redrock Flats while the town slowly, tentatively, began to breathe around them. And breathe it did. Shop doors opened, not cautiously this time, not cracked by anxious eyes, but fully, swinging wide with the uncomplicated relief of people stepping out of a shadow they had lived inside so long they had nearly forgotten it wasn't natural. The merchant couple emerged from the dry goods store and stood blinking on their boardwalk like people stepping into sunlight after a long indoors. The barber reappeared in his doorway. Down the street, a woman shook a rug out over her porch railing and called something cheerful to her neighbor, who called something back. Children, sensing, the way children always do, that the rules of the day had fundamentally shifted, reappeared from wherever they had been keeping themselves and reclaimed the street with immediate and enthusiastic purpose. Young Deputy Harris approached Cole carefully, the gun belt held out in both hands. Cole took it, buckled it on, and then looked down at it a moment. "Hopefully," he said quietly, "I won't be needing this much longer." Harris nodded, then surprised himself by smiling. 3 weeks passed. They moved like good weeks do, purposefully, with the quality of time that is actually being used rather than merely endured. Marshal Holt's paperwork processed with federal efficiency. The land deeds for both the Raven property and the Sutton family's 40 acres on the South Creek were formally restored and recorded. Judge Calloway tendered his resignation from a territorial court office he should never have held. The Silver Spur Saloon changed hands to an honest man from San Marcos, who immediately removed the loaded dice from the back tables and watered nothing except the plants he set in the windowsills. By the Marshal's temporary appointment, Cole Raven wore a sheriff's star, not comfortably, not proudly, but responsibly, which was the only way it was worth wearing. And on a Saturday morning in late August, beneath a wide oak tree at the eastern edge of town where the land opened up into long golden grass, Cole and me were married. It was a simple ceremony. The whole town came. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else brought a cake that was slightly lopsided on one side and absolutely perfect on the other, which seemed appropriate. Marshal Holt stood near the back with his hat over his chest. Walt Briggs sat in the second row and wiped his eyes with a bar cloth out of pure habit. The preacher, a thin man with a patient voice, worked through the words with quiet dignity. When he reached the end, he looked at Cole. "Do you take this woman," he asked, "to have and to hold from this day forward?" Cole looked at me. He looked at her the way a man looks at a thing he fought 3 years through hard country to get back to, with complete recognition, complete gratitude, and not a single reservation in the world. He smiled. It was the first real smile anyone in Redrock Flats had seen on Cole Raven's face, and it turned out to be a very good one. "I do," he said, "and this time it counts." The fiddle struck up immediately. The crowd cheered with the full-throated joy of people who had genuinely earned a celebration. Midnight, tethered nearby, tossed his great black head as though he too had an opinion about the matter and wanted it noted. 2 weeks later, on an ordinary morning, Cole rode Midnight slowly down Main Street, not as a man arriving with a purpose, but simply as a man going about his day in a place that belonged to him now, and to which he belonged. The shops were open. A group of children ran alongside Midnight for half a block, laughing, until their legs gave out. The merchant tipped his hat from the boardwalk. The barber called out a greeting that Cole returned. At the far end of the street, Mae stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse, one hand resting on the doorframe, watching him with those same steady, unafraid eyes. Cole touched the brim of his hat to her. She smiled. He rode on, and Midnight carried him forward into the long golden light of a Texas morning, and Redrock Flats went on around them. Breathing, living, and sounding, for the first time in a long time, exactly like a place where people intended to stay. They said Cole Raven rode into Redrock Flats looking for justice. Maybe that was true. But those who were there that day always swore. What he really rode in for was to finish a sentence that started 3 years ago in a courtroom, with a woman brave enough to say, "I do," when the whole world told her not to.